So, Canon has released the new EOS RP. We're actually pretty excited about this camera. It is being marketed as a family camera, and honestly, it is one of the best options.
Yeah, so we're gonna have a full look on this camera, but first, go check out the links below because we have all of our recommended gear for this, lenses, accessories, everything you need to get this started. Join our Facebook group. We're talking about this camera, all the things about it, helping you get started, and seeing everybody's pictures that we're taking with this camera. And again, we've got some help guides to help you go through this camera and get to know it, start using it. But here is the Canon EOS RP.
So first impression of picking up this camera, it is quite a small camera, given it is full frame. It feels quite similar to the 77D.
Yeah, I mean, this thing is barely over 1 pound, but honestly, even with that small size, you have no issues getting around. It really feels like it has just enough controls and dials. And then we also have that function dial on the top, which even the EOS R is missing. So in some ways, it's actually very nice that even with those small sizes, we have really a complete system.
Right, and what we do like about it is that even if it's too small for your hands, because I mean, given you have smaller bodies now that are mirrorless, but Canon now has created the extra grip, and they were amazing to use while I was shooting because again, I have long fingers, my pinky kept falling off without the grip, and it actually comes in some cool colors. They have red and blue, and I loved it. I used it the entire time.
Yeah, and you still have like USB-C, you have micro HDMI or mini HDMI. So really a lot of the ports and things that you would expect would be gone in a small camera, headphone, microphone, all those are still there. So Canon really did a pretty good job of keeping things extremely compact and lightweight without losing a whole lot of functionality.
Given the lack of the joystick on the smaller body, Canon really makes up for in their touchscreen on the new EOS RP. I do love that there is little to no lag while touching my focus points. The only compromise I did find was looking through the viewfinder. It is very much condensed. Canon did have to make a compromise somewhere, and that's where they found it, in the viewfinder.
Yeah, and you do still have plenty of customization, so that's awesome. Yeah. Even the mode dial on the top has 3 custom positions. You have separate customization for both photo and video as well, which is really nice to see. And even if you do add that grip, the extension on the bottom, you still do have access to your memory card slot and your battery. So everything is just really thought out overall.
Yeah. The EOS RP battery will actually be the same as the Rebel series, the LPE 17. Now, when it came to battery life, they do say that you get 250 images per charge. I shot well over 250 images, and really I didn't notice anything that was, you know, dipping or anything. I went down a couple bars, but that's it. But I know you had a different experience for video.
Yeah, it's definitely not the biggest battery in the world, and so you will notice it a little bit more than on other cameras, but especially with video, and especially the first 2 bars didn't seem to go that fast, but that last 2, man, as soon as that low battery warning picks up, it starts to go really quickly. So you're probably gonna want 2 to 3 batteries with that, keep that in mind. But I mean, it was okay, it just wasn't great.
So some general specs for this camera. We have 3 frames per second in servo, which is obviously what you want to use for your moving subjects, and you have 5 frames per second for single shooting. Canon did put a 26 megapixel CMOS sensor in this, which is a great compromise for, you know, how much this camera is.
Yeah, but keep in mind that those shooting speeds, they're probably good enough for most of the things that you're doing, but it is well below what the competition is doing in this price range. So when you start to consider things, if that will work, Canon's really limiting things here. However, 3 frames per second, which is probably what you're gonna use most of the time when shooting kids' soccer games and things like that, that's just barely enough to skirt by, but I think you'll be okay with it.
So image quality at 26 megapixels, this sensor is actually coming from your 60 Mark II. And you know, overall, there wasn't a vast improvement on the EOS RP, but if you're coming from the Rebel series, it's definitely going to be better in low light for you, which is great for birthday parties, you know, or any sort of wedding that you're attending. Now, you know, overall tones, I love Canon tones, and quality, it just was really, really solid. You're definitely getting something great from Canon here.
Yeah, really the only limitation is dynamic range, and we saw that in the 6D Mark II compared to what Canon and Nikon, or Sony and Nikon are doing with their full frames cameras. This doesn't compete in that area, so landscape photographers might want to rethink about that choice. However, quality has really stayed pretty static here for the last 3 to 5 years, which is a little bit of a disappointment. But when paired with some really nice lenses, and Canon has some really nice lenses for this camera, you can get some amazing, amazing quality images.
Yeah, and you know, we are actually really excited about Canon's announcement of the f2.8 Trinity. And I, as a wedding photographer, typically shoot zooms, as you can see from my other wedding video on here, we'll link it above. And I shoot with the 7200 f2.8, the 24 to 70 f2.8, which I'm really excited about.
And the 15 to 35 is there as well. And just a host of lenses got announced. We have the 85 coming soon, 50 millimeter f1.2 right now. And so yes, Canon has a ton of choices on lenses. The downside is that almost all of them are going to be over $1,000, except for the 35 1.8, which I'm actually shooting this right now with. So that is really the only lens that you'll find that's kind of less money. So keep that in mind. Again, we have our favorite gear that we like to pair this with. And so you might want to consider that adapter for this camera. The good news is that adapter, if you purchase before March, the end of March, you are going to get that free with your kit. So keep that in mind. Look at those links below. You're going to want that adapter because you can use that with hundreds of other Canon lenses, and it'll work great with those.
It does work great. Their adapters are really, really solid.
So time to talk video. So I'm actually really torn on the video capabilities of this camera. So in one hand, you can get some really good quality video. I mean, we shot this entire thing on the EOS RP, and it was great quality video overall. However, there are a lot of limitations on this camera that kind of make it feel like a missed opportunity for Canon here. And even if you're just a casual family shooter, not really into video at all like what we're doing, I do find that there's some limitations that will probably affect you as well. So we do have 1080p at up to 60 frames per second, so you can get a little bit of slow motion on that, not a lot, but it's something. And then also keep in mind that this does not have a very high quality bitrate option like the EOS R, the big brother to this camera. So you are going to be a little bit more limited with what you can push color-wise and just the overall quality that you can get. Also, while it does have 4K video, it is going to come with that super heavy 1.7x crop, which is kind of outrageous. But in addition to that, you do not get the signature dual pixel autofocus system, which is what is giving us this amazing autofocus, as well as you do not get a very good footage at all. I mean, there was a lot of rolling shutter when using 4K, and I just found it overall pretty much unusable for anything that I was shooting. Thankfully, the autofocus system here is top-notch. It focused extremely well. Everything was shot in here with autofocus on. And then keep in mind that that IAF is going to work as well in video. Again, really only when you get close to your subjects, and as soon as you back away, it will turn back into face priority, which is absolutely fine. I think the average person using his camera is going to be absolutely happy with the performance of the video on that. And then we do have some really cool features like clean HDMI out, and we have a headphone jack and a mic jack, and all of those things are there. However, there's also some big limitations, like in 1080p, there is no 24 frames per second. That's right, you can only record at 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second, unlike virtually every other camera in this price range. However, bump that into the almost useless 4K mode, you can actually get your 24 frames per second back. Again, I'm not sure why we're doing things like this. So yes, the quality is good enough for most people. However, for a $2,000 camera, there's some pretty big limitations, especially compared to the competition. In low light, things are okay, but just far from amazing for a full frame sensor. In 1080p, things look decent up to about 1600 ISO, but the noise levels start to creep in pretty steadily from there. Honestly, I've seen better performance from a few crop sensor cameras like the Fuji X-T3 and Sony a6500.
So Canon has again left out in-body stabilization. Although this is a disappointment, given its price point, this is not at all unexpected. Instead, you will find digital image stabilization, which crops into the video to keep things stable. While it did work well on a few occasions, it messed up enough that I actually ended up disabling it. Thankfully, most of Canon's lenses still have image stabilization, including all the new ones that Canon announced with this camera. So with this camera, we have a ton of automatic modes, as well as HDR and time-lapse. One new feature is focus stacking, which we've seen on a few other cameras. It can be really awesome, especially for product shots, where the camera can take a ton of images and stack them together to ensure everything you want is in focus. Unfortunately, the stacking process is done on your computer using Canon software, so it does take a bit of time and effort to pull off.
I do think a lot of the appeal of this camera is going to really depend on the lenses you're using. You get this nice full frame camera. However, a lot of the reasons to get a full frame camera are going to be negated if you pair that with slower lenses than you would be getting on an APS-C camera. So for a lot of you, if you are going to be looking at some very cheap lenses or not going to be able to afford some of the nicer prime lenses, don't forget that you don't need a full frame camera unless you're going to pair that with some really good glass. Now, Canon has the glass for that to make this a really good advantage over some of those other cameras. However, that glass is going to get expensive, so just really keep that in mind.
So Canon's dual pixel autofocus system is back, which was an early favorite of ours. Honestly, it's super easy to use and works incredibly well, even in low light, especially if you pair it with some wide aperture lenses. Focusing is definitely lightning fast, except when tracking moving objects, where it can be a bit slow at times. Canon has also added eye autofocus and servo, which is awesome, and video with the EOS RP. It did a great job at finding the eye and sticking to it, although it really only worked if you stayed very close to your subject. We would say within 5 feet. Every time we were more than a few feet away from our subject, it would lose the eye and default back to the face detection. Don't expect to be shooting sports or wildlife with this camera, as Canon did state, but for just about everything else, it works great.
So I did actually find it a little difficult to compare this camera with anything else on the market because it kind of occupies a new spot, being about $500 to $700 cheaper than most other full frame mirrorless cameras on the market. However, if you kind of go back to like the A7 II, you'll find that this camera competes really well with cameras like that in terms of features, and price-wise, you can pick that thing up for less money. So it just kind of depends. For a new camera, we're getting really some very good performance out of this and some really cool lenses and something brand new on the market, but we're just not seeing a lot of new features coming from this.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking to invest in the family camera, we really do highly suggest this camera. It's great, being that it is a full frame. Whereas the EOS R lacked in the price tag, which is a very high price tag, this camera would suit everyone very well. Now, the only issue is if you're upgrading from an APS-C camera or your Rebel series, you will have to invest in some full frame lenses. But again, this is a great investment and you won't regret it.
Please, if you like this video, give it a like, let us know your comments below, and stay tuned. We got a whole lot more coming up real soon.
Yes, and follow us on Instagram, and as well, please subscribe. We are so thankful for all of our new subscribers, and hitting 100,000, it's a milestone. And thank you guys so much for all of your love and support.